So, let's get into who's looking good and who's looking not good. People love to rank the teams, give a 1 to 10. It's important to note, testing tells us nothing, or almost nothing. So that being said, with the caveat that testing tells us nothing, let's rank all the teams, because I'm a content creator and that's a legal obligation of this profession. So let's go through all the teams, number 10 up to number 1, but I'm kind of going to put them in zones. You'll see what I mean. I'm not just going to say this team is number 10, this team is number 9. We'll kind of like roughly place them. Is this me hedging my bets? Yes. Because then you can't say I'm wrong. I might still be wrong. But I think it's a more accurate way to put it. And also, form in Formula 1 is dependent on lots of stuff. You could be quick in Bahrain, but then that doesn't translate to Monaco. You could be quick in, let's say, Monza, lots of straight line speed, but then you're very slow in Zandvoort because you can't handle a low speed corner. So performance is kind of in ranges anyway, and teams flip-flop between second and third, let's say, track to track. And then we have things like Mercedes, who's very quick when it's cold and not very quick when it's hot, which we'll come on to in a second. So yeah, we start out with team number 10, sort of /9. I'm going to go Sauber. Shocking, I know. They were just slow. They had the slowest overall times. They looked to be struggling kind of with the car. The drivers certainly were struggling to drive the car, particularly Bortoleto. In a way, Bortoleto is in a good position because there are zero expectations for success when driving this Sauber. If he gets P19 in the driver standings this year, that's a great result. That being said, clearly that Sauber is not easy to drive. Bortoleto, I would imagine, was not having a fun week. Yeah, it looked like a handful. It looked like they couldn't get it turned in. It looked like they couldn't get on the power, which is not ideal because turning and accelerating are quite crucial for driving fast. So yeah, Sauber, I would say 9/10. The reason I don't just put them purely in 10 is it can still be dependent. I still think they might come along through the year. I'm not saying they will, but I don't see it as a given that they're just the slowest team for the rest of the year. I said it in my bold predictions video. I can see people, particularly Haas, falling back due to lack of resources, due to lack of support from Ferrari, their kind of like big brother team. Whereas I see Sauber having a bit more of that external support. Obviously, Audi coming in next year. In a way, it makes sense for them to throw this year, get P10, get the most wind tunnel time. But in another way, lots of wind tunnel time is good, but it's not helpful if the thing you're developing is basically not even a Formula 1 car anymore. Like, they have more wind tunnel time, but it's not infinite wind tunnel time. You can't design like a whole new car. Still, lots of it will have to iterate on what currently exists. And so I would imagine the Audi organization would want this green and black monster to be not too far off the back, so they've got like a stable platform to develop onto for 2026 onwards. Because while the aero and engine are completely different for 2026, lots of the car isn't. There's still development on chassis, there's still development on vehicle electronics and control systems. All of these things will largely carry over for 2026, and so it makes sense to make them as good as you can now. So Sauber probably P10, but I think with some lucky results they could leapfrog in the constructors by the end of the year. Let's see. My next team up, I would say 8/9/10 is Haas. Haas, for the most part, looked okay. Definitely in the Komatsu era, coming out of the Steiner era, they're much more of a keep our heads down team. We're just going to get to work, do our job, do it as good as we can. They did a lot of laps, which is a good philosophy. It's always helpful. You learn more, and so you can develop more. But they were not without issue. One of the headlines of day 2 is the engine cover just came off Ollie Behrman's car. Suboptimal for overbody aero, I would say. You could say it's a freak accident, but it didn't happen to anyone else. It happened to Haas. So clearly they did something wrong. So yeah, Haas was not without struggles. They were quicker than Sauber in testing, not that that means anything, but yeah, I just see them as being the team with the least resources. Haas historically has been an early season team, i.e. they're normally okay at bringing something good over the winter, and then they kind of just fall back. Think back to previous years when they got like P5, P6 in Australia. I'll put the year up on the screen. I don't remember what that was. They often have a good start to the season, then just kind of like fall into obscurity. If they're starting in like P8 or 9, falling into obscurity could still put them in that P10 position. So yeah, above them, but still sort of 8/9/10. I'm going to put Racing Bulls, RB, V-Cup, whatever you want to call them. Great livery. And they had a decent testing, less issues than Haas and Sauber. And Tsunoda was certainly just pumping in loads of laps. Hadjar as well, but Hadjar, similar to Bortoleto, seemed to be struggling with the car. Step up to Formula 1 is hard, and it's hard to step up at a time when the team is testing new stuff, and you're not just driving normal laps. The team is asking you to do very specific things during these laps, which is one thing that pundits during testing don't normally cover. You're not just driving race laps all the time. You might be doing very specific stuff. A very obvious example of that is when McLaren was having Lando do the like full lock steering, kind of Fernando Alonso 2005 style steering, just absolutely hammering the wheel down, massively overlocking the front tires, seeing if they can generate some grip on turn in that way. So the team is asking all 20 drivers to do weird stuff in testing. They might be like, oh, do this weird thing with the throttle down the back straight. Don't turn in as hard at turn 4. We're going to see how we develop heat through the corner with slightly less steering lock, and then maybe like developing new strategies, new driving techniques that way. You're having to do loads of weird stuff while learning a new car in a new formula, and now having the added pressure that millions of people are watching. A lot of people watch you in Formula 2, but it's nothing in comparison to the speculation and the eyeballs that Formula 1 brings. And so it's tough. Hadjar and Bortoleto both clearly struggling. We'll come on to kind of my like rookie ranking in a second, but yeah, RB definitely down at the bottom, I would say. We then have a few teams all in the kind of middle region. If we want to call the front of the pack F1, and then, F1.5 is the teams in sort of 5th, 6th, maybe 7th. We then got F1.75 is the teams I just mentioned. On to our sort of F1.5. I'm going to say in the 6th, 7th, maybe 8th range, Aston Martin definitely had a struggle testing, did not do many laps at all. Both drivers ill, reportedly. Also garbage livery, but that doesn't actually make you go faster. It seems that Aston Martin wasn't looking confident in testing, but at the same time, they did have maybe the most interesting technical innovations, at least in their overbody, of all the teams. We saw some air intakes on the side of the driver headrest. They've done more than other teams in developing, side pod and front wing and stuff as well. There is stuff happening at the team. Maybe they haven't linked it all up, but I've noticed the overall media is very pessimistic on Aston Martin, given, the slump they had through last year and their form now, but it's still a team with a huge amount of momentum. Adrian Newey starts today, as I record this, is his first day at work in Silverstone. And even before him, they've had a load of new talent coming in from other teams. I don't see that team wallowing down the bottom for long, maybe in a period similar to McLaren in like 2018-19, where they had a bit of a dip and then they got into a pretty dire situation in the back half of the grid, but they were just building momentum. And so I could see Aston Martin doing a similar thing. I personally think it will come good during this year, and I can imagine us getting an Aston Martin resurgence during 2025. So I'm less pessimistic on them as other people. I think we could see them kind of as high, even as high as P5, honestly. Currently, no, more like sort of P7. But again, testing tells us nothing. Maybe they're sandbagging just for fun. and they're actually the third fastest team. Then in the same range, 6th, 7th, 8th, I am putting Williams. Kind of the exact opposite to Aston Martin. People very optimistic about Williams. They obviously had those headline figures. Sainz set the fastest lap time out of anyone through this testing. And they were going for lots of glory. But, you know, it's easy to go glory hunting. You can put one lap of fuel in. You can do a full quali simulation, run your engine higher than anyone else. And that's another thing to mention, that not every team is running their engine at 100%. Because why would you? You're just going to damage it. You run it at like 85%, 90%, because you get a massive improvement in life of the power unit if you do that. It seems that Williams were maybe not doing that and just running everything on full as if they were actually like qualifying for the Bahrain Grand Prix. So they were really going for it. People have mentioned that Sainz's best lap time, if that was qualifying for the 2024 Bahrain Grand Prix, it would have put him P2. Obviously, though, we're not in 2024, we're in 2025. If we assume the same progression from 23 to 24 is going to happen again, which is about 0.6, 0.7 seconds per lap, it would actually put Sainz's time more like P10 in Bahrain qualifying, which is better. It's better than Williams did, but I think Albon in Bahrain last year qualified like P12 or something. It wasn't that far off P10. So an improvement for Williams, yes, but maybe not as much of an improvement as lots of people like to claim. That being said, body language-wise, vibes-wise, good vibes. And then a team that I'm putting 5/6, but looking at this, no other team I've put in the 5 range, so maybe just 5. Alpine. Alpine obviously had a terrible start to last season, but did start to come good again towards the second half of 2024. Again, very established organisation, kind of in the same boat as Aston Martin now. They've got people working, they've been working there for a long time. They can develop mid-season. And the development from the end of 2024 seems to be carrying on. They seem to be in a healthy place. They just had a good overall testing, like no major issues for Alpine. Pierre Gasly seemed happy. Jack Doohan didn't seem to be displaying the same struggles that we saw from Hadjar and Bortoleto, but that might just be because the car is struggling less. So yeah, Alpine seems to have got themselves back up to the best of the rest. No, not best of the rest. Best of the midfield. You know, scratching on the points kind of position that they were at the end of last year. Kind of good for them. Glad to see that such a nice livery, and if you say that livery is bad, you are wrong, get out. It's nice to see that team kind of getting back to that point. I would love to see the Enstone team getting back slightly higher, you know, fighting up with the front runners, fighting for podiums every now and again. Wait, why would I want that? I don't like Alpine at all. What came over me? I don't know why I said that. Sorry, I'm deeply sorry to all of you. The team that does the Alpine things, you know what? I clearly am sleep deprived or something. Anyway, they seem to be back up there in that kind of 5th best range. Will they still be 5th best at the end of the year? I don't know. Again, I could see a strong surge for Aston Martin, but it's promising for Alpine, but clearly nowhere near the front 4. We still have this big divide between 4th best team and 5th best team. And so Alpine should be kind of like locking in P9s, maybe some P8s at the start of the season. Don't expect them to get any higher though without some DNFs or some like major crashes 4 cars ahead. And we then get on to the front 4, and very excitingly, it's close. We love to see a close front of the grid in Formula 1. Not going to sound the alarms yet, but we could have another 2012 on our hands. 7 race winners in 7 races. It could happen. It's looking likely that it's looking possible. Just saying. Caution. Be cautious with your optimism, as I said last weekend. But the front 4 is close, which means placing these teams is very difficult, which is one of the reasons I have hedged my bets by not placing them exactly. But I will say in our P4/P3, but no higher than that, Red Bull. Red Bull it's still Red Bull. They still are quick. They're looking fine. And particularly in the hands of Max Verstappen, that car is still fast. No mistake about it. Like, definitely still a podium contender. Big gap between Verstappen and Lawson, surprising no one. But then again, no one was expecting Lawson to come in and be on the pace of Max Verstappen. But he might need to get a little bit closer. We know how the Red Bull driver circus works. Helmut Marko will be attempting murders very shortly if this doesn't improve, so I really hope for Lawson he can push on from where he is. He's obviously the least rookie of all the rookies, so let's see how he goes. I will say, one thing I do like about Lawson, impossible to know how he is like off camera, just with the team. On camera, incredibly cocky. I know it certainly rubs some people the wrong way. He's a little bastard lots of the time, but kind of in the best way possible. And you need that. You need that sometimes in Formula 1, because if you do all these laps and you're whatever, 0.5 off Max Verstappen, sometimes all you need is you turn up and be like, I'm still going to beat him anyway. You need to have that attitude. You have to be fully delusional sometimes to be a great athlete. And so that is one element that I actually kind of appreciate from Liam Lawson, and I think it will serve him well in that Red Bull driver bonanza. I think he'll be all right, but the lap times do need to get a little bit closer to Max. But yeah, of the top 4 teams, Red Bull certainly seem to have the most struggle of this testing. As I said, a couple like total car failures, a lot of time in the garage, least laps overall. It's not a great place to be. Body language wise, definitely the worst of the top 4, but it's Red Bull. They haven't been outside like a top 3 team, a top 4 team for what? Since 2008, 7? They make good cars. They do know how to make a car, so I think they'll be fine. Definitely still a podium contender. We will see a Max Verstappen win this year. But if he wants to make it 5 in a row, this is going to be the toughest one yet. Unless they're fully sandbagging, which is the kind of thing Red Bull would do. But anyway, on to our next team. A team which lots of people are very optimistic about. I want to, again, be cautious on expectations. Mercedes. I'm going to place them in the 2, 3, 4 range. Ignore the police car outside my window. They were looking great. Mercedes had a fantastic testing. They were getting out there, they were getting a lot of laps in, both drivers looking hot. I will say Antonelli looks easily the most comfortable of any of the rookie drivers. Anytime we cut to an onboard of him, full send every lap, even the laps he wasn't going that fast, like he's driving. And I like that. I like that attitude, because unlike in Monza last year, he was driving, but in a way that didn't end in the wall, which is really good in Formula 1. That's just called being quick. Certainly seems to be the closest to his teammate of all the rookies as well. Really nice. Body language looks good for Mercedes. Car looks fast for Mercedes. With an asterisk. Bahrain was very cold, unusually cold for this testing week. And as we know from previous years, Mercedes, when it's cold, really comes alive. I don't know what it is about that car. I don't know if they have some like hyper-aggressive cooling philosophy under the bonnet there. I don't know if they have like one tiny radiator the size of like a fucking Freddo on the back of that engine, and so if you have anything more than freezing cold temperatures, the engine explodes and they have to run it on 10% power. I don't know. But there's basically 2 different Mercedes in the last couple of years. Cold weather Mercedes and hot weather Mercedes, with the cold one being maybe even the best car in Formula 1, genuinely. It was cold in Bahrain, and surprise, surprise, Mercedes was very quick. But first 2 races of the year, Australia, we'd expect it to be hotter. The actual Bahrain Grand Prix, we'd expect it to be hotter. Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. Will we see this hyper-confident testing Mercedes in those first 2 races? I'm not so sure. I think in hot weather they could still be behind Red Bull, so I want people to be cautious on that, but you never know. You never know. With a cloudy day in Australia, I would go all in for a Mercedes like double podium or even a win. Like, genuinely, that car is rapid when it's working. We then have a team that I would put 2/3, but definitely no lower than 3, like Ferrari. Ferrari is clearly better than Red Bull, I would say. Definitely behind McLaren, and condition depending, level a bit above, a bit below Mercedes, but Ferrari definitely above Red Bull. I think we can say that much. They were having a good time. Lewis Hamilton's still in his honeymoon era, very positive in all his interviews. Maybe not so much on the last day, he was kind of like getting a bit more realistic, but he was seeming very positive. Charles Leclerc was a bit more neutral, giving the kind of standard company line. Oh, it's looking okay, but we need to keep working before Australia. Just standard corporate stuff. But they were looking good. They just had a solid testing, no major concerns. Maybe not as quick as McLaren up ahead, but solid. I would say basically the same place that we left off last year, which is how most years start. People think that cars can move up and down the grid 5 places. Not really. If you finish the season second fastest team, you normally start the next season second fastest team, and that certainly seems to be the case for Ferrari. Again, yeah, condition dependent. They could be behind the Mercedes. They could definitely be behind Max, maybe even Liam. Condition dependent. It's condition dependent. I'm going to keep saying that. Number 1, it's McLaren. Didn't have the fastest overall lap time of testing. Didn't have the best qualifying runs, but just turned up, did their job. Painted the car fully green with FlowViz. We paid for this FlowViz, we're going to use all the FlowViz. But yeah, they clearly got a lot done in testing. They clearly turned up with a solid package. They seemed to be aware of how to operate that solid package, and they had very good pace on long runs, looking good. Drivers look confident, particularly Lando Norris. Oscar Piastri having a little bit more of a struggle getting this car completely locked in. But even Oscar's struggles, I would say, are faster than maybe any other team. Lando Norris, though, seems to be very at one with this car already. Excellent news for him going into Australia. It's hard to say that anyone else is a favourite to win. The season is a long time. Max Verstappen was in the same position at the start of last season, and look how that ended up. But at this current point in time, Norris is the one to beat.